Thank you so very much. So I bet you're wondering what I'm going to talk about today. So it's interesting because I'm talking about the life of wonder, and all through today I'm asked you to go back to where you were as boys and girls when wonder was a really, really big part of your life. And even though when Nicole and I sometimes talk together, sometimes we talk by ourselves, but we always share what we're talking about with each other. And so Nicole, being Nicole, looks up in the dictionary, wonder, and there's a noun definition and there's a verb definition. Nicole lit right into the noun definition. You can just see her eyes getting larger and her smile, just at the wonder that she sees in the world, and she's in tune with nature, almost being like Emerson's eye walking in the woods. But for me, I hit right on the verb, because I said, I wonder what it is that we can think about, that we can change, how we can change how we interact and create more good in our life and everything like that. And so the associative word that came up for me immediately was curiosity. And curiosity is a big word for the center because, believe it or not, that's our leadership model. The big part of it is being curious. And so what happened 2 years ago, Nicole and I, and actually the Leadership Council president, Marjorie Ray, we were at the convention for CSL in Irvine, the international convention that was in Irvine. One of the ministers I have a lot of respect for, David Alexander, was a minister in Portland. And he presented a seminar on the way that they perfected on the board and the ministers getting together and moving the church forward. And there was this book called 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. And so Nicole, being the organized person that she is, wrote all that down, and then 2 years later we needed a model, and she brought it back up for us. And sure enough, the second commitment of that is curiosity. And curiosity is a strange thing in a business setting, but it's a powerful thing, because what happens is when you're curious, you no longer can cross your arm and be judgmental. You no longer can say that I know what the right thing is for us to do. My truth is the only truth, and I'm going to fight for it and die on the battlefield for the good of my idea. You don't do that. And in fact, the conversation that we have with each other is we go around the table and say, I'm telling myself a story, much like we did when we were in our youth, because we're telling ourselves our story. And what that is saying is that I don't have the entire truth. This is the story that I believe. And it does great things. It puts people at ease. And the person telling the story has to understand that their understanding is not the only understanding that we have. And it's a really great thing for us to do. So I'm going to talk today about wonder. And I'm going to talk in three ways about wonder. Wonder from the physical things that we get to experience, from the walks on the ocean, from the sun shining and warming our skin, for the beautiful greenery that we can see each and every day. I'm going to talk about the wonder of our imagination. And I'm going to talk about the wonder, when we get to this concept we talk about every Sunday, about oneness, about how the divine expresses in us. But before I go there, I want to talk about something that I tell this story quite often, is that we have something that goes on in our life. Our founder, Ernest Holmes, referred to it as race consciousness, but it's really humanity consciousness. We have this group think going on. And I don't even think the word consciousness is good for it, because it's not our conscious thinking. A lot of things are ingrained in us, and we just make up our mind and go do something without even thinking consciously about it. And we know what happens when we put stuff out there. That's our reality. So I want to go back and look at sort of the history of what brought our great movement into fruition. And our New Thought movement, believe me, we're little babies compared to all the other movements. We've been around 200 years. That's like a teenager compared to some of the thousands of year religions and spiritual traditions. So we're like the babe in the woods. But where did we came from, and what set the stage for us to be here? Well, it started with the Socratic and pre-Socratic philosophers, and they sort of gave us our good feeling inside. They were intellectual, and they were argumentative a bit, but they got us in touch with, inside of us is a nature that focuses on good, that actually focuses on the one. And they were around from 500 before the Common Era to 200 or 100 before the Common Era. But that stage didn't last long. And always these stages of thought. The reason it's important is these stages of philosophic thought becomes the thinking of the planet. And always these stages of thought ingrain in us. And so before I go on and talk about the other philosophers, if you're giving a philosophy talk, you have to give a corny philosophy joke. So, anybody know of René Descartes? So what was his famous saying? I think, therefore I am. So René Descartes was in a bar. It's getting close to closing time. And they say, René, do you want another drink? And he says, I think not, and disappears. For philosophers, that's a pretty funny joke. So anyway, what happened after the Socratic movement was the Christianity became on board, and the systems associated with Christianity took charge. And so it became, for the next 1,500 years, if you wanted to know the mysteries of life, you had to go to a church leader. And that lasted for 1,500 years. And then you got people like Galileo and others that were ushering this new thing into the mainstream called science. And this period was called the Enlightenment. And now science was fighting and actually grabbing control away from the church leaders of explaining everything. The problem with it, the philosophers associated with science believed in something called materialism, and they got into, we can just observe anything. Nothing exists if we cannot observe it. And that worked good for a while, but then people started to wanting more. And always with movements, there's always a next movement to question them and push them out on the way. And the next movement that came was really the predecessor that set the fertile soil for the new thought to come onto the planet. And that was the Romantic movement. And Goethe was the best spokesman of the Romantic movement. But we started challenging, and these philosophers and poets and authors started saying, no, it's not, we're not in this dog-eat-dog world. Everything is not Darwinian. We're not billiard balls. We can have thoughts on our own. We're not controlled by the conditions. And Immanuel Kant then came up with this premise that we have morality inside of us, and we're going to do the moral thing regardless of the consequences. And then the poets would start saying, no, nature is beautiful. Our experience is more and more beautiful. And that became, so what was happening, so the discovery of science, and Isaac Newton was the big one who showed the way. His model worked good to propel us to where we were, but then it was no longer valid. There was all kinds of products that established this new movement of the Romantic people. How many of you remember the movie or book Frankenstein. This actually was a satire against the materialist. So, anybody remember the poet in Frankenstein? No poet? Do anybody remember what happened to the poet in Frankenstein? Frankenstein killed him. And then Frankenstein went on to tell Dr. Frankenstein this. He says, you are my creator, but I am your master. So this was a pushback of the entire movement that says, no, you cannot create A, then B, then C, and breathe some fake life into it and think it's all the human experience that there is. Because there's so much more deeper experience. There's an emotional experience. There's a spiritual experience. And we all have that. And the leader of the movement, Goethe, put this forward. He says, man is never authentically himself as he is when he is at play. So this is a learned philosopher. And so the Romantic movement gave us this model. They returned us to freedom because the materialists had jerked our freedom away, saying we were just billiard balls thrown whichever way the world does. You have freedom, then you have play, and when you do those two things, then you discover your authentic self. Powerful, powerful place to be. And always the next stage, the current stage sets the next stage. So science brought us all this stuff, and then the Romantic movement was saying it's not enough. And think about it, don't we still see those two arguments in the world today? That what we are is our conditions, and we can't change anything. And then there's people, like in this book we're reading on spiritual ecology, there's these people, like the Native Americans, they focus on it. And they get so much more out of it. And they go beyond the external experiences and live the life that is inside them. So I want to talk about, as I said, 3 concepts of wonder. Let's begin with the senses. Let's begin with taking a walk in the woods, hearing the birds, feeling the sun or the shade, feeling the wind, maybe it's moist on your cheeks, experiencing this that you haven't experienced. Because a lot of times with wonder, 2 things stop us from getting into the stage of wonder. 1, we're too busy, and 2, we don't think it's important. We think that someone has told us that you have to do this, do that to live your life, and this play and this wonder is just wasting your time. And so one of the quotes I got from the book about experiencing this physical nature goes like this. I thank you, God, for this amazing day, for the leaping greenly spirits of trees and a blue dream of sky, and for everything which is natural, which is infinite, and which is yes. So those of us who like the nature walks are very meaningful. And for me, when I don't do it for a while, something's missing inside. And the second way that we can use this concept of wonder is not with the physical world, it's with our imagination. And I want to read to you something I got out of the public domain about an author who's remembering back 20 years ago to what got her started. It goes like this. I remember the first time I finished reading The Lord of the Rings. I was sitting on the couch in the living room of the house where I grew up, near Atlanta, Georgia. It was the middle of the afternoon, with southern sunshine streaming through the windows. I read the final words of The Return of the Ring, closed the book, and sat. I couldn't move or speak. I was caught up. Even now, over 2 decades later, how that same feeling grips my soul and fills my eyes with tears, into a whirl of wonder such as I had not known before. An aching mixture of beauty and loss, that which C.S. Lewis calls joy, burst into vibrant bloom in my spirit, working a mighty layer of the lifelong transformation into the woman I am meant to be. The beauty came from finding myself in a new world, one in which I felt so much more at home, so much more myself than the real world. This, my soul sang, is home, reality, with a capital R. The loss came when the book ended, and the words the end were spoken, and I was thrust back out into the little R reality in which we are all sojourning. Perhaps I did not think to call it wonder then, but I knew that I wanted to spend my life cultivating that feeling and inspiring it in others. So that's all the wonder of imagination. And the last part of wonder I want to talk about is, to me, the most poignant type. We always tell you when you come here, you're this wonderful, beautiful, divine creation, this essential entity of the divine. And that's the third wonder, because it happens to all of us. We all have our times. Some people call them mystical experiences. Some people call them oneness experiences. We all have our times when the veil parts away and something from within inside of us bubbles up, and we know who we truly are. And we know we're blessed to be here, and sometimes it doesn't last very long, but we know who we are. And also in this book, I have a saying that was meaningful to me that describes this, about flourishing in the adoration of the divine. It goes like this: waking early, hearing an owl call from the trees, I feel a part of something stretching all around me, a deep vein of life's meaning running through all that exists. How could I live without this heartbeat, without this feeling of connection? So this essence of wonder that I'm talking about is I want you to go back to your childhood days, and I want you to play. Remember, because when we were kids, we would always say, pretend they were here, and pretend we're here, and pretend we're going to do this. And then what did you do? You just went and played. Didn't that feel good? And we've forgotten how to do that. So my challenge for you this week is to return to that sense of wonder. Find a time where you can go out in nature and live and experience all the physical sensations that you haven't had time to do. And then find a time where you can re-meet your imagination that perhaps you've stuffed down because it no longer has served you. And have a time and just imagine whatever your heart's content. And then finally, have a time where you can sit quietly and allow that divine nature inside of you to bubble up, to speak to you, and to whisper to you in its beautiful and wonderful way. And if you do that, this wonder will return in your life. And I am positively sure that your life will be a better place. Thank you very much.